this meeting to order. I'm Bill Derrick, Mayor of the City of Jeffersontown.
Kevin S., Oldham County.
John Callahan with Louisville Metro.
Ida Bolton, Doc.
Alicia Harper, Bullitt County.
John Snyder, Bullitt County.
Kevin Beatty, Town of Clarksville.
Rick Tonini, St. Matthews.
Jim Udi, NDOT.
Matt Minier, Jeffersontown.
Larry Cheney, Kipta.
Ashley Tinius, Kipta.
Amanda Duffridge with Kipta. Elizabeth Park, Kipta.
David Burton with Kipton.
Danielle Story, Kipta. Sarah Bear, Kipta.
Nick Bale with Kipta.
Tim Robinson, Sheridan.
Eddie Dunaway, Michael Waker.
Luke Robinson, Rob.
Mike King, Louisville Metro.
Jared Haley, Kipta.
Jerry Miller, District 36, State House.
Michael Hill, Lockmiller Group.
Thanks, welcome everybody. Before you've had the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve and then?
Motion to approve.
Do we have a second? Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. One time we have a public comment period. Any person here would like to make a comment? Hearing that, we'll move on. Public meeting report. Ashley, welcome back.
Thank you. From March through May. So on March 8th, we were at the Middletown Chamber of Commerce. On March 22nd, we were at the J-Town Business Expo. April 17th, we were at the Kentucky Digital Government Summit in Frankfort. April 21st, we were at the Earth Day Walk at Iroquois Park. May 11th, there was a Kentucky Association of Government Communicators Conference in Frankfort. And May 18th, last Friday, we were at Bike Together Day at 4th Street Live. And while I have your attention, I would like to request everyone here take our Survey Monkey survey on participation for the year 2016 through 2017. We do this every year, and in June, I will be updating you guys on the participation for the last year. So I'll send a link to everyone after the meeting, asking you to please go online. There's 19 questions. It doesn't take very long, but it's a great way for us to gauge how we're doing on participation. And if you wouldn't mind sharing that with your listservs and anyone that you know who is familiar with KIPTA and what we're doing, so we can get a better idea for what the public thinks about what we're doing for our outreach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Quarterly reports. Nick.
All right.
Good afternoon, everybody. My presentation today is one that we do quarterly, hence the name. This is all part of our project management process that we rolled out about a year and a half ago to better manage the dedicated funds that we get in Kentucky and in Indiana. Kind of give y'all just a little bit of information. Is this the right one? Oh.
You changed it up.
Thank you. So again, back in 2016, we started this process. It's kind of the policy and how we manage and program our federal funds that come to us directly. Each quarter, the project sponsors have to fill out a progress report. It's very brief, basically tells us, are they on schedule in terms of getting those funds authorized in that fiscal year that they're scheduled for. And so folks tell us whether they're on, ahead, or behind schedule. There's also opportunities each quarter for those projects that are delayed to request a phase shift, meaning we're moving our, we thought we were going to do construction in 2018, we're going to do it in 2019. You can do that twice without any penalties, but there's also opportunities periodically when we have funds available for cost increases for projects as well as funding for brand new projects. That's just a little background. In terms of managing costs and schedules, again, when there are funds available, you can request cost increases up to 20% of the original cost of that phase. If it's over 20%, a special exception needs to be made, and that has occurred in the past already. But those requests must go directly to TPC. We asked the project sponsor to kind of speak on those specific requests over 20%. Again, you can, in terms of how we manage the schedules, that's the phase shifting. You get 2 for each phase, and once you have shifted it out 2 years, then you need to make a special exception request to TPC. This kind of just keeps everyone we're honest in trying to move these projects as fast as possible. We know that certain things like utilities have often prevented certain phases from moving forward on a timely schedule, and those are often out of folks' control. And then there's also times that we move funds between the dedicated programs. The Federal Highway Administration allows us to do that up to 50% of the annual apportionment for each fiscal year. So let's talk a little bit about Indiana and where we are in fiscal year 2018 in terms of obligating our funds. As you can see from this table, we've got 4 dedicated funding programs, CMAQ for air quality, congestion relief. We've got the HSIP project program for improving safety, surface transportation funding, which is what makes up the bulk of our funds, as well as a transportation alternatives program, which is primarily geared towards bike, pedestrian, and transit-focused projects. So the first line, the first row is the annual allocation. So how much money do we have at the beginning of the fiscal year? The next row is how much have we obligated to date? And the final row is how much remains unobligated. In Indiana, it's a use it or lose it system, so the monies we receive for fiscal year 2018 must be spent in that fiscal year. So this table shows that for the CMAQ program, we obligated $700,000 this quarter for a total of 1.1, I should say, million. And so there are $0 unobligated, meaning there's $0 left to authorize and begin that phase of the project. In the HSIP program, we haven't had any funds obligated yet, but we're just waiting on some word from NDOT about a particular project the town of Clarksville has going on, the Blackston Mill Phase 1 right-of-way should be obligated fairly shortly. And that'll obligate that whole $880,000. And then surface transportation funds, $5.9 million were obligated this quarter for a total of $6.9. We are good there. We spent everything we received. And then finally, Transportation Alternatives Program. TARC is in the process of working with FTA on getting those grant funds in an obligated grant. They're doing a project for bus stop improvements along Eastern and Spring in Jeffersonville. Any questions about the status of funding in Indiana? All right. Today we just have one proposed change for Indiana project sponsors. We made funds available back 2 or 3 months ago now. We had some 2020 funding that was available. We only had one applicant, and that was the Clark County. They applied for highway safety program funds for a roundabout that would be constructed at County Road 403 and Stacy Road. And because nobody else applied for the funds, the recommendation that we brought to TTCC and are bringing to you guys today is to award $283,500 in federal funds fiscal year 2020 for the design phase. And so I'm asking you all to consider that at this time.
We have a motion. So moved. Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Moving on to Kentucky, we think this table is going to look a little bit different because we do have the ability in Kentucky to carry funds over from one year to the next. We also only have authority to award funds in 2 of the 4 dedicated funding programs. That is the Surface Transportation Program and Transportation Alternatives. At the beginning of the year, in the Surface Transportation Program, we had about $43 million programmed. And since that time, we've obligated about $5.3 million, about $300,000 this quarter. And there's been some phase shifts as well, totaling about $720,000. So we've still got some work to do there, but based on the quarterly progress reports that were submitted by Indiana or Kentucky project sponsors, there's, I feel like, 15 to 25 different project phases that are scheduled for obligation in the last quarter of fiscal year 2018. So I think we'll see a lot more funds being obligated in the next quarter when I present in July. In terms of kind of the big picture we're looking for with the STP program, because we've kind of grown our carryover balance for so many years, we need to we need to obligate at least $14 million more by the end of this fiscal year in order to avoid adding monies to our carryover balance. And that's really important. At our last federal certification review, the federal government noted our large carryover balance, and so we have another one of those reviews coming up this year, and no doubt are they going to probably bring that up again. So we just need to make sure we keep making progress towards that end. In terms of the Transportation Alternatives Program, we had about 4.1 million programmed at the beginning of the fiscal year. We've obligated about 100,000, shifted about 530,000 to the future years. But I know of several projects, including a Shively sidewalk project that's scheduled for construction of about $1 million. I think we'll have no problem meeting that, our big picture goal, which is to obligate $1.1 million this fiscal year to make sure we don't lose any funding as well. So again, there's a bunch of projects that are scheduled for obligation this next quarter. Any questions on kind of the big picture status of dedicated funding in Kentucky? All right. I've got two proposed changes for you all. They are both phase shifts. The City of Middletown has CAP funding for 2 sidewalk projects, one on Bliss Avenue and one on Weatherby. They are not going to be able to get to begin construction this fiscal year, and so they are requesting their first phase shift to move those construction phases back to next year. But my understanding is they have a new consultant and they're moving forward to make sure they get that done next year. My requested action is to approve these 2 phase shifts listed above on this table.
Motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
John. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thanks so much.
Connecting Kentuckiana goals, objections, and update. David.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yes.
The black one. First, I want to apologize to everyone. There was a packet. The packet did not include the memorandum that needed to go with this presentation, so I made sure to leave a copy of it at the podium. Does everyone have a copy of agenda item 6? I want to make sure you have that before we go further. Anyone need a copy of agenda item 6? It's 2 pieces of paper. Right here. 2. Tell you what, you have to start these down that way. Okay, they're coming around. If you have not gotten one. But what I've done is sort of help us walk through that is I've put copies of the memo that you can't read, by the way. I've noticed that that's going to back you. Because the type is too small. But what we are basically looking for to make some modifications to the objectives that are part of the goals and objectives for the MTP update that we are currently working on connecting Kentuckiana. And so what we want to do today is just sort of touch on some of those. A little background. Back in April of 2013, a working group of the TPC was put together to help us to define what direction we thought the MTP update should go. And a series of goals and objectives were identified. In that memorandum on that cover page is a list of the organizations and jurisdictions that were involved with developing the goals and objectives for this update, and it was approved by this committee in August of 2013, which is also included in the packet. I'm going to look to borrow yours. I can use my own presentation. So what we've got is that we want to bring back to you the goals and objectives. The objectives to some of these goals need to be modified. And so that's what we want to sort of touch on today. So we're going to be requesting action to approve these tweaks. And they are basically tweaks to some of the objectives that were approved back in August of 2013 by this body. Okay. So what we basically have done with the goals and with the objectives is some of the original objectives had target timeframes of 2020 or 2025. In other words, we had the objectives that we wanted to be smart. Part of which is, let's see, sensible, measurable, agreeable, achievable. Is that what it is? Something like that. Anyway, so there is a series of smart, and my mind is somewhere else today. But they had target dates of 2020, 2025. We've modified those to be 2040, which is the horizon year of the update that we're currently working on. So what you're seeing here are just those changes of the target dates for some of these various objectives from 2020 to 2025 to about 2040. And so that's what we're sort of trying to highlight. On the maintenance objectives, we did change some of the terminology to reflect the PM2 performance measures that Amanda's going to talk about in just a moment. But what you're seeing are basically changes to the target dates of each of these objectives. Nothing else is really being modified or tweaked. We just want to make sure that we are doing a better job of aligning our goals and objectives with our performance management plan. So we're changing just some of the time frame to make it more reasonable. From 2020 to 2025 to 2040, there are no other changes to the goals at all. We tweaked some of the objectives, and we're just trying to make sure that we align with the KIPTA performance management plan that Amanda will be talking about in just a second. There you have it. So we are looking for action to approve the tweaks or the changes to the objectives and the goals and objectives of the ETP.
Anybody have questions?
I just have a comment, and I know we are changing the dates only, but back then in 2013 and now, I still have concerns how the baseline will be developed for these objectives for us to be able to track progress.
Well, that's something that Amanda's going to be talking to you in about 30 seconds.
Excellent, excellent.
But we have, not to steal your thunder, Amanda has led the effort of trying to make sure that we dig down deep and we come up with good, strong baselines. And I think we've done that. So I think we're in a really good position to move forward. And it's actual show progress in how well our transportation plan does in meeting these goals. So I think we're in good shape.
Anything else? Entertain a motion to approve changes. Second.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Amanda, did you answer all the other questions that people would like to do?
I would love-
David threw you under the bus.
I did throw you under the bus.
I would love to start that discussion. Thank you, David. All right, my name is Amanda Dethridge, for those of you who do not know me, and I am talking about the performance management plan today. So first, a little refresher. What are performance measures? Of course, everybody here understands the goal and objective, what a goal and objective is, but a performance measure is actually below an objective. So the objective seeks to do something measurable to get towards the goal, and the performance measure is even below that. It's very specific. The performance management process starts by collecting and analyzing data, which is what we've really been focusing on the last few years. A lot of these measures, we've talked before about doing things about measuring how many sidewalks, miles of sidewalks that we have in our region, but we've never been able to answer that question until recently. So we're collecting and analyzing data. We're looking at historical trends and setting targets based on that data. We want to invest in projects that help us meet those targets. Then a few years later, we'll assess our progress towards meeting those targets, and then we'll report that progress to you, our TTCC and our TPC, as well as our community stakeholders, so that we can start the process all over again. And now that we know how well we've done this first go around, we can set new targets for next time. So why do we need performance measures? Well, first of all, the federal government requires us to have it. MAP 21 and then the FAST Act first required performance-based planning, which they define as a strategic approach that uses data to support investment decisions. So they want to see us justify why we're spending money on our projects, that our projects are tied back to, there's data there that says that we're identifying these needs and we're addressing these needs in our transportation system. In our performance management plan, we refer to the federally required measures by federal performance measures. And FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, and FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, are the two organizations that require those performance measures. But it's also good planning practice. We've been inspired by this federal process of setting measures and measuring data and linking it back to investment decisions. But we didn't think that the feds went far enough with what we wanted to prioritize in our region. And hopefully everybody got a handout when you walked in today. It looks like this on the front page. This first page here will show you the national goals set forth by Congress. These are the national transportation goals all the way to the left that Congress wants everybody to focus on. The middle column there are MTP goals that we just talked about and just modified. So you can see the connection between the national goals to our MTP goals. And lastly, on the right are our performance measure sections and our performance measure codes. So you can see every performance measure that we talk about today ties back to our MTP goal, which ties back to the overarching national goal. So everything goes back to national goals. But you'll see here at the bottom, transit and non-motorized, they don't have a connection to a national goal. It's really hard to set a transit or a bike and ped measure at a national level because some rural areas just don't need those things. But here at KIPTA, in our region, we have prioritized those things. So we've decided to go above and beyond and develop performance measures that we are calling NPO developed performance measures, such as some of our transit ones and some of our non-motorized ones, to help us get to the rest of the goals and objectives that are not identified by the federal ones. We want to allocate our funding resources among the transportation system's many needs. It's really hard to address every problem at once, so we want to prioritize where we want to spend that money. Get that biggest bang for our buck. We've been implementing projects for a long time, but we haven't really tracked progress, connected it back to data to show that we've built 10 projects in the last however many years that have addressed this issue. We want to be able to show these statistics to you that we've never been able to show before, show a level of accountability and transparency that we've never done before by tracking our progress and reporting that to you. We do have a very brief history of performance management at KIPTA. This group, the TPC, adopted the PMP, the Performance Management Plan, back in August 2015. It did have NPO measures, developed measures, and federal measures then. However, that was before the federal measures were finalized. So we're updating the plan today so that we can bring that up to federal standard and also bring our NPO developed measures up to what we're currently moving forward with Connecting Kentuckiana. All of our targets are derived directly from the goals and objectives. So if it says to reduce crashes by 20%, that 20% comes directly from the goals and objectives that the working group approved a few years ago.
Can I interject just a moment? I'm terribly sorry. Is there any owner of a white Buick LaCrosse from Evansville in here? Can you just move your car, please?
Sure.
Thank you. My apologies.
That's okay. Moving on, the federal measures. The targets that we have for our federally required measures are established using similar methodology to our state DOTs. KYTC and NDOT both have to do these performance measures as well. So we have the unique circumstance of being a bi-state agency. So when both Kentucky and Indiana set different targets, how do we go about setting our own targets? And there are ways that we can go about doing that. We can either commit to supporting the state's targets, or we can set our own targets as just the KIPTA region as a whole, just our own counties. And that's what we've done with a few of our measures, and a few of them we might just follow the state's lead. This is a component of the MTP. It has heavily influenced the development of Connecting Kentuckiana. It's almost the foundation of it. Anything that we do with our projects that are going to be in our long-range plan will be affected by these performance measures. It's also intertwined with our TIP. It's considered in the project management process in the TIP that Nick was talking about earlier. I'll go back into that in just a second. It's also tied to our KIPTA Online Resource Center. So any data that we're talking about that's mappable, we're going to have available on our Online Resource Center so that you can, when you're interested about a specific intersection or location, you can go to this website and see all the data that we have associated with these performance measures and other things on our Online Resource Center. Now, how is it connected to our MTP? I want to go into a little bit of detail about that. We're starting a brand new process with our long-range plan with Connecting Kentuckiana, where we're going to ask project sponsors to fill out applications in order to get their project into our MTP. We will ask you lots of questions on this application that essentially tells us how well that project addresses performance measures. Then when staff evaluates these projects on how well they do meet them, projects that help achieve targets are more likely to be selected for inclusion in the MTP. That's not to say that projects that don't address performance measures won't be in our MTP, because we can't account for every circumstance, every problem. Sometimes things pop up that you can't foresee, and we always want to be flexible for those situations. But in general, the projects that address more of our performance measures and help us meet our targets are more likely to be selected for Connecting Kentuckiana. It's also connected with our TIP, the project management process. New projects in the TIP, the project sponsor will have to explain how that project contributes to achieving targets. And like Nick just had earlier, we had a phase shift that you guys approved. A working group comes together to look at those phase shift or cost increase applications, and that project's contribution to achieving performance targets is considered when we approve or deny those requests. So now that we're really gearing up to having this in the future, when a project sponsor says, hey, I can't get this project done this year, I need to move it back 1 year. If it addresses lots of performance measures, if it's a high priority, then we might approve that request. But if it doesn't, then it might end up falling by the wayside to make room for the projects that are prioritized. Again, there's going to be special circumstances for anything, so that's not a hard and fast rule. All right, going back to our federal performance measures, FHWA has what we call PM1, safety, which mainly addresses fatalities and serious injuries, fatality rate, serious injury rate. We also have what we refer to as PM2, asset management, which looks at the condition of our pavements and bridges. We also have PM3, system performance, which is mostly travel time reliability, which looks at mainly congestion. When you leave from your house to your work, you expect that trip to take 15 minutes. But it didn't take 15 minutes today, it took 25. That means that wasn't very reliable. So that's one way of measuring congestion that the federal government wants us to look at. FTA measures also look at vehicles and transit facilities, the condition of their and age of their vehicles. Our MPO developed performance measures fit into some categories: safety, transit, non-motorized, which of course means bicyclists and pedestrians, economic impact, motor vehicle access, which is our term for congestion, roadway maintenance, which looks at mainly pavements and bridges, freight movement, and air quality. So what I'm going to go through today is the rest of your handout here has the performance measure sections, so you can follow along with me if you'd like instead of looking at the screen. I'd mainly like to look at the performance measures that were not in the 2015 version of the performance management plan. I want to talk about what is brand new or what has changed since that version of the plan. For these safety measures, all of these measures were in the previous version of the plan. These targets were identified for the first 5. They are federal performance measures. Those targets were approved by this body back in February. The S6 crash rate reduced by 20% target is directly from our goals and objectives. Moving on to transit, now there are a few changes here. T1 is the same as last time, we've just updated the baseline. T2 has modified a little bit. It's more of just the wording, because this is a federal measure, and the way that the feds require us to account for this has changed. So we've gone from, I think it was the age of the transit fleet to % of the fleet exceeding the useful life benchmark. T3, A and B are brand new measures. Essentially, all of those under T3 are assessing the level of transit accessibility by all of these different clusters that KIPTA has identified. We have community access clusters, which is essentially a compilation of attractions, parks, libraries, public services in a dense area. High-density medical clusters, high-density shopping clusters. We also have high-density housing clusters, high-density employment, and freight clusters as well. And we added community access and high-density medical clusters to the transit section this time. We also added T4. We want to enhance transit access to schools. And T5 was modified slightly, reduce average headway time on TARPs to find Title VI routes. Before it was just between EJ areas and high-density employment areas, but it was really hard to draw those connections and only count headway on just certain sections of routes. So we decided to go with the Title VI routes instead and the headway on the entire route. Moving on to the next page of transit, T6 is slightly modified. Last time it said number of park and ride lot spaces total, but we've decided to change it to occupied during peak hours because we want to make sure that these park and ride lots are utilized. We don't have a baseline on this, but we've talked about maybe doing an in-person inventory or perhaps using aerial photos to look at how many people, how many cars are on every lot. We want to increase that utilization. T7 remains the same number of park and ride lots with pedestrian access. I think your handout actually says pedestrian access twice on here somewhere maybe. But it's bike and ped access. T8 is a brand new one to encompass KIPTA's Ticket to Ride program. We want to increase the number of commuters in that program, both through our van pool program and through just identifying who's carpooling. We know people are carpooling in the region, but we want to know a good number of how many people are actually carpooling. And we want to increase that number, encourage people to share rides. And T9 is a brand new 1% of facilities rated under 3.0 on the term scale. This is a federal performance measure, and that's just a way of rating transit facilities through an FTA assessment of condition. Non-motorized, a lot of these are the same as the last version of the plan. N1, we want to reduce the number of crashes involving pedestrians and bicyclists. It's not enough to us to just reduce crashes. We want to specifically reduce these crashes because the rest of these performance measures talk about getting more people on sidewalks, getting more people in bike lanes, and creating an opportunity for more people to be on the road like that. And when there's more opportunity, there's more crashes too. But we don't want to see that happen. We don't want to see that correlation. So we want to reduce those crashes as well. N2, we want to reduce gaps in the existing pedestrian and bicycle networks. As you guys know, that about 2 years ago, there was a huge effort of us to go out in the region and inventory our bike and ped facilities throughout the entire KIPTA region. So we do have a map that has all of our sidewalks and bike lanes through the whole region, and GIS essentially has to draw a negative of that map so that we can calculate how many gaps that we have. Yes, sir?
I'm a guest, so I apologize for speaking up, but along those lines, I was a Metro councilman 4 years. 8 years ago, I was elected. 4 years ago, state representative. Well, you go back 8 years, there were 2 projects for bike lanes from Old Main Street in Middletown all the way to Beckley Creek Road, or Beckley Station Road. Funds were there, and there's not a single shovel of dirt been moved. Isn't that important?
That is important. I'm not familiar specifically with that project.
There's actually 4 miles. There's about 5 or 6 projects representing a total of 4 miles. And those all 5 segments were identified 4 years ago, over 4 years ago, but not a single shovel of dirt has been moved.
Yeah, that's.
Isn't that a problem?
That is a problem. Do you know if that was funded through KIPTA or?
Well, there was part of it was CMAQ money.
Yes, it's a variety of funding, and those.
Yeah, it's a variety of funding. Some CMAQ, some is what?
The projects are funded.
SLO or STP, I can't remember.
The projects are funded. Metro Parks has moved along on part of it.
And I think that's part of the
Metros
problem is Metro Parks trying to manage that as opposed to the highway people.
Well, that has changed completely.
Ah, great. Good news.
One segment's going to a construction letting next month.
Good. Great.
Yeah, a little bit of an aside, but it is connected. that's part of the project management process, the other P&P that KIPTA has, and Nick kind of touched on a little bit in his presentation. We are holding project sponsors a little more accountable nowadays to getting projects done when they say they're going to. That's why we have these phase shift applications, and that's why we consider these performance measures when they have these phase shift applications. That way we're not constantly pushing things off anymore. We want to make sure that we get things done in a timely manner. So we are working on that. Thank you. All right, so we do want to reduce gaps in those bike and ped networks, but a brand new one, N3, A, and B, we want to enhance pedestrian access and bicycle access to schools. Now, just a note here, you'll see that we use the word enhance instead of increase, and that's intentional because for our baseline and our target, all that we can really measure is how many miles of sidewalk and bike lanes there really are out in the region. But when it comes to evaluating projects for our inclusion in our MTP, we want to give credit to those projects that rehabilitate sidewalks too. If they're in poor condition, we want to give you credit for rehabilitating those as well. We just don't have a baseline on how many miles of those sidewalks are in poor condition. We don't have that yet, maybe someday. We also purposely use the word dedicated bicycle access anywhere we refer to bike lanes here, because legally, any bike can ride on any road, but we want to make it safe for our bicyclists. We want dedicated bicycle facilities, we want bike lanes. Even if it's something as simple as Sheros, where it's painted on the road with a sign to alert motorists, hey, be aware there could be a bicyclist here. We want to see even that as well. N4A, enhanced pedestrian access with community access clusters. We modified B a little bit, the dedicated bicycle access. You'll see in the baseline, it says miles of dedicated bicycle facilities inside these clusters and within 1 mile of the boundary. That means we want to get people to these clusters. We want people to ride their bike to the clusters. We want bike lanes inside the cluster while they can ride around inside, but we want to get them to the cluster as well. Now the rest of the non-motorized ones, these are all brand new performance measures this time around. They're pretty much the same. Enhanced pedestrian access and dedicated bicycle access within or leading to high-density medical clusters and high-density shopping clusters. So these are clusters that KIPTA has identified and that you can see on our KIPTA Online Resource Center where these are located. Economic impact. These are all slightly modified from the last version, but pretty much the same as last time. We want to enhance transit access, pedestrian facilities, and dedicated bicycle facilities within and leading to our high-density employment clusters. And then E2 is looking more at the future of our economy. We want to enhance bike and ped facilities in areas of moderate to significant employment growth. If you were at TPC last month in April, you might recall that we talked about our socioeconomic data, and that data is exactly how we are defining what is a moderate or a significant employment growth area. Moving on to motor vehicle access. Again, this is just kind of our way of assessing congestion. V3 and V4 at the bottom are exactly the same as they were in the last plan. They look at level of service on interstates and arterials. Level of service is just a way of measuring congestion on a scale of A, B, C, D, E, or F. Where obviously F is failing. And D on interstates really isn't that bad. If you had a level of service A on every interstate, you'd have 20 lanes for everybody to get there. You know, you don't want 20 lanes either. But V1 and V2 are brand new performance measures. Those are federal ones, the level of travel time reliability on the interstate and on the non-interstate national highway system. Those are in accordance with our federal regulations. We do not have a baseline for those yet because the data on that is massive. It's maxing out Excel's capabilities, so we're having a little bit of trouble calculating those. There is a good chance we might end up just taking the state's lead on those. The state DOTs just announced their targets for these performance measures actually last week. And so we have until November to set those targets, and there's a good chance that we just might support the state's targets on their lead because we don't have the capability of doing that right now. Roadway maintenance, if you want to just look at M1 and M2 at first, those are our pavement condition measures. If you look at M1A and C, those are percent of pavements in good and poor condition. Those are federally required measures. But B, percent of pavements in borderline condition, that's a KIPTA-defined term. we wanted to look at, of course it's important to, when a pavement is in poor condition, we want to rehab that pavement back into good condition. However, we don't want them to fall into poor condition to begin with. So we came up with the concept of borderline, when it's technically a fair condition pavement, but it's at risk of falling into borderline because it's the way that it's calculated, it could be at risk of falling into poor maybe next year. So we want to rehab those before they fall into poor. So those are mostly federal measures with a little bit of MPO development measures put in there as well. We have until November to set those targets. M3 is bridge, percent of deck area in good and poor condition on bridges carrying the NHS. And that's a federal measure, and it's a good measure. But if you look at M4, percent of bridges that are in good and poor condition, they are different because we didn't really like the idea of calculating bridges by their deck area. So if a large bridge falls into poor condition, that's obviously an issue. We need to do something about that. But we don't want to just worry about the large bridges. We want to worry about all of our bridges. We don't want any of our small bridges to fall into poor condition. And we don't want to also only worry about bridges that carry the national highway system. We want all of our bridges, no matter what road they carry, to be in good condition or fair condition. So that's why we added those measures as well. Yes, sir.
Rating roads is not something you do every 5 years. Rating roads is something you do twice a year. Are we planning on rating our roads twice a year? Because winter can definitely change our road conditions from good to worse, and one can jump ahead of the other.
Sure.
So how are we going to rate our borderline roads?
That's the thing. With pavement condition is a little different. We do worry about all of our roads, not just our interstate and non-interstate NHS, but because of issues like that, and because of issues like the way Jefferson Town measures their pavements and the way Louisville Metro calculates their pavement condition, the way every jurisdiction calculates it is a little different. And so for right now, we're only concerned with what's federally required, the interstates and the non-interstate NHS, which is what the states do. And so we're just getting the data directly from them. They update it every year. So right now, we're not concerned with the issues of, did we have a particularly bad winter and did we collect it at the wrong time that year for the non-interstate, non-NHS roads? Does that make sense? Maybe in the future we would like to have that when we can get everybody a little bit more on the same page.
But even these you're going yearly?
Yearly, yes, and that data comes directly from the states, and I believe they collect it in the late spring.
That's right.
Is from what I understand.
Every time they update their data, we'll be using the most up-to-date data. And eventually, as Amanda said, as we move forward with this and everyone is looking at pavement management, asset management, some of these systems are going to have to coincide with one another.
Yeah.
The measures are going to have to be common in one jurisdiction to the other across the board, hopefully nationally, because these are nationally dictated measures that eventually will cause that to occur. Same thing with accident data, accident reporting, things like that. There's inconsistency between the states on those reporting issues.
We collectively within this jurisdiction can do that easier than we can nationally, because
Yes.
roads in Florida don't have snow on them, or roads in other areas don't have salt. So I mean, there's a lot of conditions that have to be built. They're built different.
And through the years, the different jurisdictions, different public works groups have looked at their pavement in a different way. Is it something that we can afford to fix when it gets to this point? Are we okay with alligator cracking as long as it doesn't fault? So that's kind of what's led to where we are today, those inconsistencies. But we'll be using the state data to begin with.
It would be good for this jurisdiction, especially the metro area, to be common ratings.
Yeah.
Because when a road goes through, a county road goes through a city, it'd be nice if we talk the same, whether it's pumping or needs to be paid yesterday or 2 years from now. That'd be something good for us.
That might be something good that maybe KIPTA can help organize that way we can all get into accordance with how the feds are requiring that we rate our pavement condition. That way we're always speaking the same language. All right, moving on to freight movement. F1 and F2 are both the same as the 2015 plan. F1 is maintain or improve roadways on the KIPTA freight network that was approved just last month that are at level service D or worse. We want to make sure we have reduced congestion for our on-time freight deliveries. F2, the number of locations on the KIPTA freight network within a mile of our freight clusters where roadway geometry or restrictions impede freight movement. So weight limits, height restrictions, turning radii. We don't have that baseline, although we do have a freight plan in the works with a consultant, and that is something that was agreed upon would be collected, so hopefully we'll have that for you maybe later this year. The new performance measure in this section is the Truck Travel Time Reliability Index on the interstate. That is a federal performance measure, and that just looks at the reliability for our on-time freight delivery. Lastly, air quality. We only have one measure here. It's an NPO developed measure. We want to meet or do better than mobile source budgets in the state implementation plan. We wanted to use the word exceed, but that would mean we are not in good accordance with the SIP. So we said do better. It doesn't sound like the best language, but we want to do better than the SIP budgets. We don't have a baseline for that right now because everything's kind of up in the air with this court case and EPA and the way that they're looking at conformity. But Bernadette did address that earlier, and we are moving forward with, I do think we have some answers finally on how to move forward with our air quality analysis. So hopefully by the time Connecting Kentuckiana is adopted, we'll have a baseline for this as well. All right, so our next steps. By May 27th, we have to incorporate PM1, all of these safety targets, in our MTP and our TIP. If we update our MTP and our TIP after that date, they have to address PM1 safety, and we should have no problem meeting that requirement. Later this summer, we would like to finish collecting some of the missing baseline data and approve targets for some of those NPO developed targets that we talked about that we're close to but don't have just yet. By October 1st of this year, TARC must have their TAM plan completed, and they must report those FTA targets in their TAM plan. And we do plan on just taking the targets that TARC has set and putting those into our performance management plan, because of course that agency is way more equipped to address those targets than we are, so we're just going to take whatever they say their targets are. Any updates or amendments to the MTP or TIP after that date must also incorporate those FTA measures, which we should have no problem doing. And then the state DOTs, even though we're not a state DOT, we're not required to do one of these. I wanted to point it out. They have to submit a baseline performance period report by October 1st of this year. And they have to do this every 4 years. So we've kind of been inspired by that process of doing a baseline performance period report, so that we're going to do one for ourselves, just for our own committees. By November 16th, we have to report our PM2 and 3 targets, those pavement and bridge condition targets, and those travel time reliability targets. We either set our own, or we commit to supporting the states by that date. By the end of 2018, we're proposing that KIPTA submits our own version of our baseline performance period report, and we'll submit that every 4 years as well, so that you know the condition of all of our performance measures in that year, how we're starting off. These were our targets up to that date. Here's the historical data that we have on that. By May 20th of 2019, any updates or amendments to our MTP and TIP must incorporate those PM2 and 3 measures that we're going to set by November. By October 1st, 2020, state DOTs have to submit their mid-performance period report. So it shows that baseline performance period report, but also the progress that you've made in those 2 years. The states must report those on those federal measures to FHWA and FTA. Now, we don't have to do that, but we thought it's a good idea, so that maybe by the end of 2020, we would do the same thing, have a 2-year report showing you how well we've done towards meeting our targets. And for some of these, we might even tweak some of these targets, something like safety, where we get data every year. That can be easy. We can easily set targets every year. We might tweak our targets at that time. Again, in October 1st, 2022, state DOTs submit their full performance period report. So a performance period is every 4 years. So we would do the same thing for you guys, for TPC. We will submit a full performance period report letting you know, here's our 4 years worth of data along with all of that historical data that we've got. We'd like to be able to tell you things like tying back all that data to our projects that we funded during those 4 years. There's maybe one of the pavement ones, we've done however many maintenance projects during these 4 years, and our percent of poor pavements went from this percentage to this percentage. We'd like to be able to tell you statistics like that we can't really tell you right now, but that's kind of what we're envisioning what these baseline performance period reports will be like in the future. All right, the action requested today is approval of the draft May 2018 Performance Management Plan, which replaces the 2015 version. I'll be happy to answer any questions for you guys.
I entertain a motion to approve or amend.
I have a comment. I would like to have some extra time to look at the TARC requirements. There is a lot of new things added, and also the only item that is tied to TARC town plan is actually revenue and non-revenue vehicle. Everything else is service and probably analysis report by KIPTA, including Title VI. So who did you guys discuss that with at TARC? Jeffrey or
The
somebody else?
only targets that we are awaiting you to set are the FTA required ones. Those would be T2, A, and B, the percent of non-revenue and revenue vehicles exceeding the useful life benchmark. And then the last one, T9, the percent of facilities rated under 3.0 on the term scale. Those are the FTA required ones. Those are the ones that we're waiting on you. As far as the other transit targets, those were from the goals and objectives of the working group that we had back in 2015, before the 2015 version of the plan. We just carried those through with our updated baselines.
TARC was involved, but you were involved with that,
I
in
was.
setting those.
I was. I do remember.
And this is a living, breathing document that will be amended as we move forward. This is intended to be something that is fluid, and as these objectives and goals and targets change and shift, different data is available. We come back to this body and make those amendments.
Especially these NPO developed ones. These are your targets. These are TPC's targets. These are KIPTA's. So we have every right to change those however we want, whenever we want.
And then maybe it should adopt it as such, as a fluid, live document. That
It is. We've said that from the beginning.
Because this will change, and for example, some of these things are really difficult to measure. I mean, if we measure Title VI in 2015, and we are still referencing the same document, I mean, or EJ areas, that is still something to be discussed. And then, for example, on page 14, enhanced transit access leading to high-density employment clusters. And then we have the information about service miles within 1 mile of the boundary of these clusters. This 1 mile can be completely non-accessible.
It can, for sure.
So it may not have access to by sidewalks, by bike lanes.
Right.
So it's irrelevant.
And it may not need it.
Right.
It may be an area where it's impossible. It could be a ravine. It could be a huge building.
Exactly.
Right.
But
This is very.
But we can't cover each one of those contingencies with this overall document. We have to look at each circumstance separately as we move forward. And the way we've approached this performance management process, the Federal Highway Administration wants us to be included in our MTP, putting together our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, putting together our Transportation Improvement Program, and document that through those processes. And what we decided to do was develop this document that includes the process, how we're going to do it, and set those goals, targets, and objectives, and baselines in that document. And as anything changes, we'll make modifications to that document and that document alone. The others can stand the way they are. But this document is going to be fluid, and it can be amended on a monthly basis. After we do this. This is our first major amendment to this since we established those ourselves ahead of the federal legislation. And that's why we're bringing it to you today, to bring that up to those new standards.
I needed to voice my opinion that this is very loose, very vague, difficult to measure. That's all I needed to say, and I did say it back then, because these targets are very fluid.
We understand that. Many of them are.
Exactly. And
All of our
the other thing, I mean, this is a big document, even if it's fluid. Having it presented to us today and approve it today, I guess that's what we do. But
Well,
It's not something that I would prepare personally or professionally.
That's why we have the mailing a month in, or a week in advance of the meeting. We also had the same document out for the TTCC to review. So it's
I
been
missed
out
the meeting,
there
my
for almost a
apologies.
month. That's why we send things in advance, hoping that some of you will look at them.
If I can-
Many of you don't have time to do that, but
No, this one I believe wasn't attached, or was it? I'm
It wasn't
sorry.
attached.
There's a link.
There's a link.
Okay.
in the agenda.
If I can give you a little peace of mind, I've talked about how the performance measures are tied into if you're going to get into the TIP or the MTP, and they certainly are. But TARC is a little bit of a different animal. You are our biggest transit agency in the region. We have a project evaluation that we're developing on how well each project addresses these performance measures, and there's a transit section, and TARC is pretty much the only project sponsor that's even likely to get points there. But I can't emphasize enough that if you don't address performance measures, or you don't address it in the area that we want you to in high intensity improvement clusters, that does not mean it's a bad project and we won't accept it, because we understand that there are caveats and there are complications with all of these, the way that we've chosen to calculate them, the miles of transit routes. That's hard. But
Right.
and maybe moving forward, there might be a new way to develop assessing how well we're serving our community through transit. But this was the best that we had right now at the time. And like Larry said, this is fluid. If we decide to change these targets or the baselines or how we measure them, that's TPC's prerogative to do that, certainly. And if we change it halfway through, that's okay with us.
May I add?
Yes, sir.
I guess, yes, these are going to be hard, but that's never been a reason for us not to try to do things. You know, hard is good, and we are ready and able to take on hard, and we'll give it our best shot all the way through. I think that we have made leaps and bounds in terms of trying to respond to the needs and wants of our community, including transit, and I think that this is going to be a good opportunity for us to do that. It may be hard, but it's doable, and we're going to be asking you for a lot of help.
I know how hard it is, and I know how doable it is, so thank you.
Yeah, no, we know it's hard, but we want to push all of our project sponsors, and we understand that while all of these are goals and we want to meet all of our objectives and meet all of our targets of our performance measures, that it's not likely that we're going to get 100% of these by 2040, but we want to see progress towards them, and that's probably the most important thing out of everything here, is just the progress in the right direction.
If you look at the MPO generated goals beyond the Federal Highway Administration performance measures, we did establish some pretty lofty goals across the board. If you look at every one of them there, it's cream if we can get it. We're not just looking at milk, we're looking at cream. So,
Shovel cream.
yeah, well, people still drink cream, but it's a process that we've decided as a group to undertake, and all of you have been part of that.
That's not the question at all. I mean,
Oh, I know, I
obviously,
understand.
it's the process that has to be satisfied. My point was the outcomes of the process. That's why I was raising the question. The actual realistic outcomes of this entire plan.
Well, sure, and it's going to take
That's
everyone in
what
this
it
room
is.
for any of that to occur.
Well, I'd like to see us measure not only what the different people requesting the grants are taking time, I'd like to see us measure how long the state takes, how long utilities take, because several times, it's not that the person that holds the grant is taking the time, it's the people that approves the grant that takes the time. So it would be nice if we came up with measures in a three-category system, where it's both the city of Jeffersontown, District 5, or LG&E, which is holding this project up in the future, so we can see what's the problem.
That's definitely something that's outside of the MPO's control, and we definitely understand that too when it comes to our project management process. When you're asking for a phase shift because utilities didn't get done on time, we understand that happens. Unfortunately, that happens too often, but we don't have any jurisdiction over utilities companies to say that. Maybe we should
If we do
something
some,
about that.
if we do some studies to find out that if somebody's asking for phase shift for a reason, and we report them to the state representative that has to change laws to make them do it quicker,
Yeah,
we could get these things
you're onto
done.
something, for sure.
And we are tracking that.
We're gonna start tracking things like that, so we have data to back it up when we have these claims that we can't get our projects done because utilities are holding us up. We're gonna have hard and fast data to support that, so that maybe we can.
It will all be documented.
That's-
The reasons behind the request will be documented.
We've documented where they could be tabulated, would be great for us when we go to the governor and say, you need to cut the red tape to do these
Yeah.
projects done.
That's a great idea. Are there any other questions or suggestions?
Do we have a motion to approve this at this time? Did you want to table it, or did you okay with it?
No, obviously, we are not going to come up with a solution either today or any sooner, especially since FDA did not finalize their goals. And as you mentioned, transit is not part of FHWH goals. So, and then basically, we are not awaiting on TARP, we are awaiting on FDA.
Yes.
So
And
that
it's
probably
very-
needs to be corrected in this document as well.
It's very important for us to have this document in place and up to date too,
I
because
mean,
of
I'm not stopping the
Federal
process or
Highway Administration
impacting any
review.
timelines or anything, with understanding that this is a document that needs to be updated as the federal requirements go forward.
Do I have a
Thank
motion?
you, I appreciate that.
We have a motion to approve the living document. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Amanda?
All right, switching gears now. Okay. We are talking about administrative modifications today, switching gears, talking about the tip. This is included in your mailing and your agenda packet. We do have 15 project changes in Kentucky. One was J-Town. We changed the description and added a little bit of funding to our Waterston Trail Phase 1 project. Louisville Metro Transportation, we changed the project description slightly on one of the termini of the streets for the one-way street conversion to two-way Phase 1. Middletown had 2 projects. We are shifting back the construction phase 1 year. That was actually what Nick talked about earlier today that you all approved. They did submit the phase shift application in compliance with the other CFP, the project management process. And then TARC has 11 projects in our administrative modifications. There are 9 Section 5307 projects. That is the urbanized area formula funding, the program for transit capital and operating assistance. And they had 2 Section 5339 projects, which is the replacement or rehabilitation or purchase of new buses. Moving on to the Indiana projects, we had 14 projects from Indiana. We had 1 from Clark County that Nick presented earlier today and TPC approved. It was programming of the HSIP funds for the design phase of County Road 403 and Stacy Road roundabout. We have 11 NDOT projects. They are all state-funded projects. They're STP state safety, NHS, and IM funds, maintenance projects mainly. And then 2 New Albany changes. We reduced the funding in McDonald Lane construction phase and added that funding into the Grant Line Road construction phase. All of these changes to the TIP are minor and do not need TPC approval, but we wanted to show all those changes to you. Anyways, are there any questions about any of these projects? All right, thank you guys.
Any business, Larry?
Yes, the TPC and board meeting in June is being moved up to the 21st, with the 21st at 12:30. We have a conflict with county officials,
County Judge Executive.
county judge executives.
Both meetings?
Yes, TPC and board will both do it. So TPC at 12:30 and board at 2 on the 21st. No, sir.
Entertain a motion to, entertain a motion to recess, or not recess?
Adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. We have a second? All in favor?
Aye.